In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, a champion swimmer, Lydia Brent, is found drowned in the Ashford Estate's pristine pool of death, too shocking to be an accident. Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose keen eyes unravel a web of envy, ambition, and betrayal. Was it the stern coach, driven by relentless discipline? The teammate, consumed by jealousy over a stolen gold medal? The calculating sponsor, guarding his empire? Or the ex-fiancée, haunted by a love that wouldn't fade? As secrets ripple to the surface, Miss Marple reveals a truth as chilling as the water itself. One moment of envy drowned a champion, and no one escapes the tide of guilt. Chapter 1. The silent pool. The sun blazed over St. Mary Mead, an unaccustomed heat that made the roses in Miss Jane Marple's garden droop and the air hum with languid bees. She sat in her wicker chair, shaded by a climbing clematis, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. The tranquility of the afternoon was broken by the crunch of gravel on the path, and Miss Marple looked up to see Inspector Craddock striding toward her, his face set in a way that suggested more than a social call. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, removing his hat and mopping his brow. "I'm afraid I've come on grim business. There's been a death at the Ashford estate, a most perplexing one." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild blue eyes sharpening behind her spectacles. "A death, Inspector? Most distressing. Pray, tell me more." Craddock settled into the chair opposite, his voice low. "It's Lydia Brent, the champion swimmer. Found this morning in the estate's swimming pool. Drowned. Miss Marple's tone held a note of gentle incredulity, as if she'd misheard. "A champion swimmer, you say? That is extraordinary. One does not expect such a person to meet their end in water." She set her knitting aside, her mind already turning over the anomaly. "Was she alone?" "So it seems," Craddock replied. "The pool was locked for the night, but she had a key for late training. The groundskeeper found her at dawn, floating in the deep end. No signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries, at least, not at first glance." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture that those who knew her well would recognize as the prelude to a keen observation. "No signs of a struggle, you say? Yet a woman who could swim like a fish does not simply drown. Tell me, Inspector, who was close to Miss Brent?" Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "There are 4 we're looking at. Harold Grayson, her coach, a tough sort, known for driving his swimmers to the limit. Clara Voss, her teammate, always in Lydia's shadow. Reginald Tate, her sponsor, a wealthy businessman who bankrolled her career. And Dr. Simon Wells, her former fiancé, a medical man who parted ways with her some months ago." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers absently smoothing the edge of her shawl. "A coach, a rival, a benefactor, and a lover scorned. Quite a cast, Inspector, and their demeanor. Shaken, all of them," Craddock said. "Grayson was brusque, insisting it must be an accident. Clara seemed nervous, barely meeting my eye. Tate was all business, talking about his brand's loss. Wells, well, he was quiet, almost too quiet." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to her garden, where a blackbird pecked at the earth. "In St. Mary Mead, Inspector, I have observed that quiet grief can mask many things: guilt, fear, or even calculation. I should like to see the pool, if I may. Sometimes the scene itself whispers what people will not." Craddock hesitated, then nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that. Your insights have a way of cutting through the fog. Shall we go now?" The Ashford estate lay a mile beyond the village, its sprawling lawns and Georgian manor a stark contrast to the modest cottages of St. Mary Mead. The swimming pool, a modern addition, gleamed like a sapphire in the walled garden, its surface mirror smooth under the relentless sun. Miss Marple stood at its edge, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the tiles as she surveyed the scene. The water was clear, The surrounding area pristino, discarded towels, no scuff marks, no hint of chaos. Locked, you said? She asked, glancing at the iron gate. Yes, Craddock confirmed. Only Lydia, Grayson, and the groundskeeper had keys. Clara had access through Lydia, but no key of her own. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the deep end, where Lydia's body had been found. A champion swimmer would not train in the deep end alone at night, not without reason. Was she preparing for a specific event? The national championships, Craddock said. She was favored to win gold again. Clara was expected to take silver, as usual. Silver, Miss Marple murmured, her tone thoughtful. How often it chafes those who crave gold. She turned to Craddock, her expression serene but resolute. I should like to meet these people, Inspector, and perhaps see Lydia's training schedule and any records of the pool's maintenance. Small details, you know, can reveal so much. Craddock smiled faintly, accustomed to her methods. I'll arrange it. But what are you thinking, Miss Marple? An accident, or something darker? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. In my experience, Inspector, accidents are rarely so tidy when ambition and envy are at play. This pool may be silent now, but it has a story to tell, and I intend to listen. As they walked back to the manor, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, to the time young Lily Carter had fallen from a ladder while picking apples. An accident, they'd said, until Miss Marple noticed the saw marks on the rung. People, she said softly, almost to herself, are so very careless with their secrets. Chapter 2. The champion's shadow. The drawing room of the Ashford estate was a study in faded grandeur, its high ceilings adorned with plasterwork that spoke of a bygone era, though the heavy velvet curtains and polished mahogany furniture lent it a certain dignity still. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her knitting bag at her feet, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she listened to Inspector Craddock's measured account of Lydia Brent's life and death. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room, and Miss Marple's keen eyes missed none of the details: the faint dust on the mantelpiece, the nervous fidgeting of Craddock's pencil, the distant splash of water from the pool beyond the garden. Lydia Brent was extraordinary, Craddock began, flipping open his notebook. 24 years old, born in a small village not unlike St. Mary Mead, but her talent for swimming set her apart. Early, she won her first national title at 16, and by 20, she was breaking records across Europe. Her name was everywhere: newspapers, posters, even a brand of swimwear sponsored by Reginald Tate. She was training for the national championships when she died, expected to take gold again. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was already sifting through the implications. A young woman of such renown, she said softly, must have cast a long shadow. And shadows, Inspector, can breed resentment. Tell me about this teammate, Clara Voss. Craddock's brow furrowed as he consulted his notes. Clara's 22, a strong swimmer, but always a step behind Lydia. They trained together under Harold Grayson, but Clara's never won gold, silver, or bronze at best. The press called them rivals, though Clara insists they were friends. Still, I caught a certain edge in her voice when she spoke of Lydia. Jealousy, perhaps. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that suggested she had seen such edges before. Jealousy, Inspector, is a curious thing. In St. Mary Mead, I recall a young woman, Ellen Baker, who smiled so sweetly at her friend's wedding, yet later confessed to cutting the lace on the bride's gown. Envy can wear a friendly face. What else do we know of Clara? She's ambitious, Craddock said. Grayson says she trains harder than anyone, but Lydia had a natural gift Clara couldn't match. There was an incident at the last championships. Clara claimed Lydia cut her off in the final lap, costing her the gold. The judges disagreed, but Clara's never let it go. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her fingers twitching as if reaching for her knitting needles. A grievance like that can fester, she murmured. And the others? The coach, the sponsor, the former Judge Craddock leaned back, his chair creaking. Harold Grayson's a taskmaster, 50 years old, ex-military. He's trained champions before, but Lydia was his pride. He says her death is a tragedy, likely a cramp or exhaustion from overtraining. Reginald Tate, the sponsor, is for a businessman who made his fortune in sporting goods. Lydia was his golden goose, her face sold his products. As for Dr. Simon Wells, he's 30, a respected physician in the county. He and Lydia were engaged until last year. He claims the breakup was mutual, but I'm not so sure. He seemed haunted. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze drifting to the window where the pool glinted faintly in the distance. Haunted, you say? Grief can haunt, but so can guilt. I should like to see Lydia's training schedule, Inspector, and any correspondence she may have had with these people. Letters, you know, can reveal so much more than words spoken aloud. Craddock nodded, jotting a note. I'll have them brought to you. We also have the pool's maintenance records, though they seem routine. No chemicals out of balance, no equipment failures. Routine is often where secrets hide, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. In my village, Mr. Thompson's perfectly maintained garden shed was where he kept his stolen silver, hidden behind the flower pots. Let us not assume anything is too ordinary. Craddock rose, promising to return with the documents, and Miss Marple was left alone in the drawing room. She stood, her slight figure moving with surprising agility to the window, where she gazed at the pool. It was a modern construction, its clean lines at odds with the estate's ancient charm, and she wondered what it had witnessed in its silent depths. A champion swimmer, drowned in her element, it was as incongruous as a bird falling from the sky. Her thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, to the time young Tommy Pierce had fallen from the church tower. Everyone had called it an accident, but Miss Marple had noticed the loosened bolts, the work of an envious hand. People, she murmured to herself, are so predictable in their weaknesses. That evening, Miss Marple dined with her old friend, Dolly Bantry, at the Bantrys' modest manor. Over a simple meal of roast chicken and potatoes, Dolly leaned forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. Jane, you must tell me about this dreadful business at the Ashford estate. A swimmer drowned. It's like something out of one of Arthur's detective novels. Miss Marple smiled, slicing her potato with precision. It is rather novel-like, Dolly, but far less tidy. Lydia Brent was a young woman at the peak of her powers, yet she met her end in a pool she knew as well as her own heartbeat. I find that most intriguing. Dolly's fork paused midway to her mouth. You think someone did her in? Pushed her under, perhaps? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone remained measured. I think, Dolly, that strength in one sphere can be a vulnerability in another. A swimmer trusts the water, trusts those around her. If someone betrayed that trust, it would be a simple matter to hold her under, especially if she was caught unawares. Dolly shivered, despite the warm evening. How ghastly. Who do you suspect? That coach sounds like a brute. Harold Grayson is certainly forceful, Miss Marple agreed, but brutes are often straightforward. I am more curious about Clara Voss, the teammate who never quite reached the podium's top. And the sponsor, Mr. Tate, is wealth rested on Lydia's success. A faltering star might not suit his ambitions. Then there is Dr. Wells, whose heart may not have mended as neatly as he claims. Dolly leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. You think it's one of them, don't you? Oh, Jane, you always see what others miss. Like that business with Mrs. Harmon's missing brooch. Everyone thought it was the maid, but you knew it was her nephew. all because of a smudge on the windowsill. Miss Marple chuckled softly. Observation, Dolly, is merely a matter of noticing what others overlook. In this case, I shall need to observe these people closely. Their words, their glances, the things they do not say. Lydia Brent's death is no accident, I am certain of it. The next morning, Miss Marple returned to the Ashford estate, where Craddock awaited her with a stack of papers, Lydia's training logs, letters, and the pool's maintenance records. She settled into a quiet corner of the library, a room lined with leather-bound books and smelling faintly of polish and old paper. The training logs were meticulous, detailing Lydia's grueling schedule, 6 hours daily in the pool, strength exercises, and diet plans, all overseen by Grayson. Miss Marple noted the entries for the week before Lydia's death, several late-night sessions, often with Clara present. Clara was there until 9, she murmured, her finger tracing the dates. Yet the groundskeeper saw someone near the pool at 10. Curious. The letters were more revealing. Lydia had corresponded regularly with Tate, her tone professional, but strained in recent months. "I'm tired, Mr. Tate," she'd written in one. "I need a break after the championships." Tate's reply was curt. "Your contract obliges you to compete. Rest can wait." Miss Marple's lips pursed. A man who saw Lydia as a commodity might not take kindly to her faltering resolve. Simon Wells's letters were fewer, written before their breakup. They were tender, almost poetic, but one stood out, dated a month before the tragedy. "I wish you'd choose yourself over the medals," he'd written. "I fear what this life is doing to you." Miss Marple folded the letter carefully, her mind turning over the doctor's words. Regret or a veiled warning? Clara's name appeared in no letters, but the training logs told a story of their own. Clara's times were improving, closing the gap with Lydia's, yet the championships had seen Lydia triumph again. Miss Marple recalled the village sewing circle, where young Mary's perfect stitches had sparked envy in her friend Clarinot. This Clara, but the parallel was striking. Envy, she knew, could simmer beneath a smile. Waiting for its moment, she closed the logs and stood, her shawl slipping slightly as she moved to the window. The pool was visible, its surface catching the morning light like a sheet of glass. "A silent witness," she said softly, "but not a mute one." She resolved to speak with each suspect, to watch their eyes and hear their silences. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that truth often hid in the spaces between words. In the glance averted, the hand that trembled as she left the library. She passed a portrait of Lydia Brent, hung proudly in the hall. The young woman's face was radiant, her eyes bright with determination, her swim cap gleaming like a crown. Miss Marple paused, studying the image. "You were a star, my dear," she murmured. "But stars, I fear, burn brightest before they fall." Her thoughts returned to Craddock's mention of jealousy, and she considered Clara Voss once more. In the village, she had seen rivalry turn to malice. Mrs. Price's ruined rose garden, sabotaged by a neighbor who coveted her prize blooms. Clara's silver medals, always second to Lydia's gold, might have been a heavier burden than anyone realized. Yet Miss Marple knew better than to fix on one thread. Grayson's discipline, Tate's greed, Wells's broken heart, each was a strand in a tangled skein, and she would need to unravel it with care. She stepped into the garden, the heat pressing against her as she approached the pool once more. The water was still, almost mocking in its calm. Miss Marple's eyes traced its edges, noting the absence of any mark or disturbance. "If you were held under," she whispered, as if addressing Lydia herself, "it was by someone you trusted, someone who knew your strength and used it against you." Turning back to the manor, Miss Marple felt the weight of the task ahead. The champion's shadow was long, and within it lurked a truth that would not be easily brought to light. But she was no stranger to shadows, and in St. Mary Mead, she had learned to find the truth, even in the darkest corners. Chapter 3. The Coach's Command. The morning sun had barely crested the hills of St. Mary Mead when Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Ashford estate, her sensible shoes crunching softly on the gravel path. The air was already warm, promising another day of unrelenting heat, but Miss Marple's mind was cool and focused, turning over the threads of Lydia Brent's death like a pattern in her knitting. She had arranged to meet Harold Grayson, the coach, by the poolside, where the scene of the tragedy might prompt unguarded words. Inspector Craddock had offered to accompany her, but she declined with a gentle smile. People speak more freely, Inspector, when they feel unobserved. A little chat by the water will do nicely. The pool lay serene in the walled garden, its surface a mirror reflecting the cloudless sky. Harold Grayson stood at the shallow end, his broad shoulders hunched as he stared into the water, a stopwatch dangling from his neck like a talisman. He was a man in his 50s, his face weathered by years of sun and discipline, his eyes sharp beneath a furrowed brow. As Miss Marple approached, he straightened, his posture military stiff, and offered a curt nod. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson," Miss Marple said, her voice as mild as a summer breeze. "I do hope I'm not interrupting your routine." "Not at all," Grayson replied, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Though I'll admit, Miss Marple, I'm not sure what an old lady can do that the police haven't already tried." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles, undeterred by his bluntness. "Oh, I find that a fresh pair of eyes can sometimes see what others miss. You were Lydia Brent's coach, I understand. A great responsibility, shaping a champion." Grayson's chest puffed slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "Lydia was the best I ever trained. Strong as an ox, quick as a dolphin. She could have been the greatest, bar none. Her death—" He shook his head, his voice trailing off. "It's a damn waste." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, settling onto a bench by the pool, her hands folded in her lap. "A tragedy, indeed. Tell me, Mr. Grayson, how did Lydia seem in the days before her death? Was she as strong as ever?" Grayson hesitated, his fingers tightening around the stopwatch. "She was tired," he admitted. "I pushed her hard had to. The Nationals were coming, and she was up against stiff competition, but Lydia thrived on pressure. She never complained, not once." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the pool, noting the smooth tiles, the absence of any scuff or scratch. "Tired," she murmured. "Yet a champion swimmer, tired or not, does not simply drown. Did she ever mention feeling unwell? A cramp, perhaps, or dizziness?" Grayson's jaw tightened, and he looked away, toward the deep end where Lydia had been found. "She was fine," he said brusquely. "If she'd had a cramp, she'd have made it to the edge. She knew that pool like her own skin. I told the police it must have been an accident, some freak mishap." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. "An accident, you say? Yet you trained her to be invincible in the water. Did anyone else have access to the pool that night? Clara Voss, perhaps?" At Clara's name, Grayson's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing his face. "Clara was here earlier, training with Lydia. They finished around 9, as usual. Clara's dedicated, but she's no Lydia. Never was." His tone held a hint of disdain, and Miss Marple noted it, storing it away like a stitch in her mental tapestry. "Clara must have found it difficult," she said softly, "always second to such a star." "Did they get along, the two of them?" Grayson shrugged, his calloused hands flexing, "as well as rivals do. Clara pushed herself to match Lydia, but it was never enough. There was some tension after the last championships. Clara thought Lydia played dirty in the final lap. Nonsense, of course. Lydia won fair and square." Miss Marple's fingers twitched, as if longing for her knitting needles. "Rivalry can be a powerful force," she observed. "In my village, I recall a young man, Peter Stokes, who challenged his friend to a race across the meadow. It was all in fun, until Peter tripped his rival to win. Small victories, you see, can spark great resentments. Grayson's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his gaze returning to the pool. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping slightly as she stepped closer to the water's edge. She peered into the depths, her mind picturing Lydia's final moments. "This pool," she said, almost to herself, "is so very still now, yet it saw such violence. If Lydia was held under Mr. Grayson, it would have taken strength and surprise. Who among those close to her could have managed such a thing?" Grayson's face darkened, and he took a step back, as if the question were a physical blow. "I don't know what you're implying, Miss Marple. I was in my quarters that night, reviewing training tapes. The police have my alibi." "Oh, I imply nothing," Miss Marple said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "I merely wonder. You knew Lydia's strength better than anyone. You would know how much force it would take to overpower her." Grayson's hands clenched, the stopwatch swinging slightly. "Anyone could have come through that gate if they had a key," he said defensively. "The groundskeeper maybe, or someone who got hold of Lydia's key. I don't know." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Of course. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. You've been most helpful." She turned to leave, then paused, as if struck by a sudden thought. One last thing, did Lydia ever speak of retiring? A young woman so driven might tire of the race. Grayson's eyes widened briefly, then narrowed again. Retiring. She was at her peak. I'd have fought tooth and nail to keep her in the game. She knew that. Miss Marple smiled faintly, filing away his vehemence. As she walked back to the manor, the pool's stillness lingered in her mind, a silent witness to a crime she was certain was no accident. Grayson's pride in Lydia was genuine, but his quick dismissal of Clara's grievances and his insistence on an accident piqued her curiosity. In St. Mary Mead, she had known men like Grayson stern, commanding, blind to the resentments their authority stirred. Old Mr. Hargreaves, the choirmaster, had driven his singers to exhaustion, never noticing the bitterness in their eyes until one slipped arsenic into his tea. Back at the manor, Miss Marple met Inspector Craddock in the library, where he was sorting through a fresh batch of evidency, groundskeeper's log, and a set of photographs from the pool area. "Anything useful from Grayson?" Craddock asked, pushing a photo toward her. It showed the pool at dawn, Lydia's body blurred but unmistakable. "In the deep end. He is a man of discipline," Miss Marple said, studying the photo. "But discipline can blind one to subtler currents. He believes Lydia's death was an accident, yet he flinched at Clara's name. There is tension there, Inspector, and I suspect it runs deeper than he lets on." Craddock frowned, tapping his pencil. "Clara's story checks out so far. She says she left at 9, as Grayson confirmed. But the groundskeeper swears he saw someone near the pool at 10, a figure in a dark coat. Could have been Clara, or someone else entirely." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. A dark coat, at 10 o'clock on a warm summer night. Most curious. We must ask ourselves, Inspector, who had reason to linger by that pool, and why they would hide it. She glanced at the photo again, noting the pool's pristine edges. There are no marks, no signs of a struggle. If Lydia was held under, it was by someone she did not fear, someone who could approach without raising her guard. Craddock leaned forward, his voice low. "You're thinking Clara, aren't you? That business about the championship's her thinking. Lydia cheated." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Clara is a possibility, but we must not rush to judgment. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a young woman, Agnes, accused of stealing because she was seen near the vicar's silver. It was her sister, you see, who took it, out of spite. We must look at all the threads: Grayson's ambition, Tate's investment, Wells's heartbreak. Each could have knotted into something deadly." As Craddock gathered his papers, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the pool, its stillness a mockery of the violence it had concealed. She resolved to speak with Clara next, to test the waters of her rivalry with Lydia. But Grayson's words lingered, his insistence on an accident, his unease at Clara's name, his fierce pride in his champion. Strength, she murmured to herself, can be a weapon, but so can loyalty. And in that moment, she knew the pool held more secrets than its glassy surface revealed. Chapter 4. The teammates' tale. The library of the Ashford estate was a sanctuary of polished oak and leather-bound volumes, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and wax. Miss Jane Marple sat by a tall window overlooking the garden, where the pool shimmered like a distant jewel under the late morning sun. She had requested a meeting with Clara Voss, Lydia Brent's teammate, and now waited, her hands folded over a small notebook where she jotted observations in her neat spidery script. The room was quiet, save for the faint tick of a grandfather clock, its rhythm a reminder of time's relentless march that had stopped abruptly for Lydia. Clara entered with a hesitant step, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her swim-toned shoulders tense beneath a simple blouse. She was a striking young woman, her features sharp and her eyes a pale blue that seemed to flicker with unease. Miss Marple rose, offering a warm smile that belied the keen scrutiny in her gaze. "Miss Voss, how kind of you to come. Do sit down. I find these old chairs quite comfortable, though perhaps not as lively as a swimming pool." Clara managed a thin smile, perching on the edge of a chair, as if poised to flee. "I don't know what I can tell you, Miss Marple," she said, her voice clipped. "I've already spoken to the police. Lydia was my friend. Her death—" "Awful," Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy, though her eyes missed nothing the way Clara's fingers twisted a loose thread on her sleeve, the slight tremor in her jaw. "Awful indeed," she said softly, "to lose a friend so young, and in such a way. You trained together often, I understand. You must have been very close." Clara's gaze darted to the window, then back to her hands. "We were teammates. We pushed each other. That's how it works in swimming. You need someone to keep you sharp." Her words were measured, but there was a brittleness to them. Like ice about to crack, Miss Marple tilted her head, her spectacles glinting in the light. "How admirable. I confess I know little of swimming, but in my village, St. Mary Mead, I've seen how shared endeavors can forge strong bonds or, sometimes, rivalries. Tell me, Miss Voss, how did you feel about Lydia's success? She was quite the star, wasn't she?" Clara's lips tightened, and for a moment her eyes flashed, with something raw resentment, perhaps, or pain. "Lydia was exceptional," she said, her voice low. "She had a gift. Everyone loved her. The crowds, the press, the sponsors. She won gold at the last championships, you know? I took silver." The last word was almost a whisper, and Miss Marple noted the way Clara's hands clenched. The thread now snapped in her fingers. "Silver is a fine achievement," Miss Marple said kindly, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. "Yet I imagine it must be trying, always standing just behind such a bright light." In St. Mary Mead, I recall a young woman, Sarah Lane, who played the organ beautifully, but was ever overshadowed by her sister's singing. It wore on her, you see, though she never spoke of it. Clara's eyes met Miss Marple's, and for a moment they held a spark of defiance. "I worked just as hard as Lydia," she said, her voice rising. "Harder, sometimes. But no one saw me. It was always her face on the posters, her name in the headlines. Even when I beat my own times, it didn't matter. She was the champion." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged, though her mind was weaving connections. "That must have been difficult," she said. "I understand there was some disagreement at the championships, something about the final lap." Clara's face flushed, and she leaned back, crossing her arms. "It was nothing. Lydia cut me off in the turn. She knew it too. I could have won, but the judges didn't care. They never do when it's Lydia Brent. Her voice trembled, not with grief, but with a bitterness that seemed to linger like a bad taste. Miss Marple's fingers twitched, as if reaching for her knitting, though she kept them still. A moment like that can linger, she said. In my village, I once knew a young man who felt cheated in a cricket match. He harbored that grudge for years, until it led to a most unfortunate act. Resentment, you see, can grow like a weed. Clara's eyes widened, and she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I didn't resent Lydia, she said, too quickly. We were friends. I was happy for her. I just wanted my chance. Her voice broke, and she turned toward the window, her shoulders rigid. Miss Marple watched her, noting the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the way her hands clenched into fists. Of course, my dear, she said gently. I only wish to understand. You left the pool at 9 that night, I believe. The training logs confirm it. Clara nodded, her back still turned. Yes. We finished our session, and I went to my room. Lydia stayed to do extra laps. She was always pushing herself. Her voice was flat now, as if reciting a practiced line. Miss Marple made a small note in her book, her pen moving with deliberate care. And you saw no one else near the pool? No one lingered after you left? Clara turned, her expression guarded. No, it was just us. The gate was locked when I left. She hesitated, then added, You should ask Grayson. He was always hovering, checking on Lydia's form, or maybe Tate, he was obsessed with her image. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Thank you, Miss Voss. You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you any longer. As Clara moved to leave, Miss Marple added, almost as an afterthought, Oh, one thing more, did Lydia ever speak of retiring? A young woman so driven might grow weary of the race. Clara froze, her hand on the doorframe. Retiring? She said, her voice sharp. Lydia, never. She lived for the pool. It was all she had. She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. Miss Marple sat in silence, her eyes drifting to her notebook, where she'd written, Clara bitter, defensive, lied about resentment. She closed the book and leaned back, her thoughts turning over Clara's words, her tone, her sudden agitation. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen such behavior before. Mrs. Elwood, who smiled at her neighbor's prize roses while secretly plotting their ruin. Envy, Miss Marple knew, could twist even the closest bonds into something deadly. She rose and crossed to the window, gazing at the pool once more. Its surface was unbroken, a perfect mirror, yet she sensed the ripples of truth beneath. Clara's story aligned with the training logs, but the groundskeeper's sighting of a figure at 10 o'clock gnawed at her. Clara had been quick to deflect, pointing to Grayson and Tate. Was it fear or calculation? Miss Marple returned to her chair, her mind drifting to the other suspects. Grayson's stern pride, Tate's cold pragmatism, Wells's quiet grief each held a piece of the puzzle, but Clara's bitterness was a vivid thread. She recalled a village fete, where a young woman's envy over a baking contest had led to a sabotaged cake. The act petty but revealing. Clara's silver medals, always overshadowed by Lydia's gold, might have sparked a darker impulse. As the clock struck noon, Inspector Craddock appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from the heat. Any luck with Clara? He asked, loosening his tie. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. She is a young woman under great strain, Inspector. Her friendship with Lydia was not as warm as she claims. There is a wound there, one that festers. But we must be cautious. Wounds can make one lash out, or they can simply make one silent. Craddock frowned, pulling out his notebook. She stuck to her story. Left at 9, Lydia stayed behind. But that groundskeeper's report bothers me. A figure in a dark coat, lingering by the pool. Clara's not tall, but she could have been mistaken for someone else in the dark. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. Or someone wishes us to think so. We must look at the others, Inspector. Mr. Tate's ambition, Dr. Wells's heartbreak, Mr. Grayson's controlage could have led to that poolside moment. But Clara, her envy is palpable. I shall need to see her again, perhaps in a less formal setting. People reveal more when they feel at ease. Craddock sighed, rubbing his temple. You make it sound so simple, Miss Marple. I've got a stack of reports and no clear answers. If Lydia was held under, it was by someone strong, someone she trusted. Clara fits, but so could Grayson or even Wells. Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes were sharp. Trust, Inspector, is a fragile thing. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a woman who trusted her best friend with her secrets, only to find them spread across the village. Lydia trusted someone that night, and it cost her everything. We shall find out who and why, as Craddock left. To pursue his inquiries, Miss Marple remained by the window, her gaze fixed on the pool. Clara's words echoed in her mind. She lived for the pool. It was all she had. Yet something in Clara's tone suggested more than grief, more than rivalry. It was a note Miss Marple had heard before, in the voices of those who felt life had cheated them, and in that note, she sensed the first ripples of a deeper truth. Chapter 5. The sponsor's stake. The Ashford Estates study was a monument to Reginald Tate's success. Its walls lined with framed advertisements featuring Lydia Brent's triumphant smile, her form sleek in branded swimwear. The room smelled of polished wood and expensive cigars, and a large mahogany desk dominated the space, cluttered with contracts and a silver-framed photograph of Lydia Midstroke. Miss Jane Marple stood before this desk, her slight figure almost comical against its grandeur, yet her presence filled the room with quiet authority. She had requested a meeting with Tate, the sponsor whose wealth had propelled Lydia to fame, and now awaited him, her hands clasped over her shawl, her eyes taking in every detail, the pristine blotter, the locked drawer, the faint smudge on the photograph's glass. Tate entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to command, his tailored suit impeccable, his silver hair swept back. He was 45, his face handsome but hardened by ambition, and his smile, though polite, did not reach his eyes. Miss Marple, he said, extending a hand. A pleasure, though I'm puzzled why an amateur sleuth wishes to see me. The police have already asked their questions. Miss Marple returned his handshake with a gentle grip, her smile as mild as a spring day. Oh, Mr. Tate, I am no sleuth, merely an old woman with a curiosity for human nature. In St. Mary Mead, I've found that a few questions can uncover what haste overlooks. You were Lydia Brent's sponsor, I understand. A great investment, no doubt. Tate gestured to a leather chair, settling behind his desk with the ease of a king on his throne. Lydia was more than an investment, he said, his voice smooth but calculated. She was the face of my brand. Every gold medal she won sold thousands of swimsuits, goggles, you name it. Her death is a blow not just personally, but to my business. Miss Marple nodded, seating herself with care, her eyes never leaving his face. A blow, indeed. She was a remarkable young woman. I've seen her photograph, such vitality. You must have been very proud. Tell me, how did you come to sponsor her? Tate leaned back, his fingers steepled. I spotted her at a regional meet 5 years ago. She was 16, raw but unstoppable. I signed her on the spot, best decision I ever made. She had a quality, you see, that drew people in. Charisma, strength, the lot. Clara Voss was there too, but she didn't have Lydia's spark. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture so subtle Tate might have missed it, but her mind was alert. Clara Voss, she said softly. A fine swimmer, I'm told, but always in Lydia's shadow. Did you ever consider sponsoring her instead? Tate's laugh was short, almost dismissive. Clara's competent, but she's no Lydia. My brand needed a winner, not a runner-up. Clara's silver medals don't move product. Lydia did. He paused, his eyes flickering to the photograph on his desk. Still, I gave Clara opportunities, training camps, equipment. She's got no cause to complain. Miss Marple's gaze followed his to the photograph, noting the way his fingers lingered near it. You were close to Lydia, then? Beyond the business, I mean. Tate's smile tightened, and he adjusted his cufflinks with a practiced motion. Strictly professional, he said. I admired her drive, of course, but our relationship was about contracts and results. She delivered, and I supported her. That's how it worked. Miss Marple tilted her head, her spectacles catching the light. Yet such arrangements can become personal, can they not? In my village, I recall Mr. Harmon, our grocer, who sponsored the local choir. He was all business, until he took a shine to the lead soprano. It caused quite a stir when his wife found out. Tate's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained even. Nothing like that here, Miss Marple. Lydia was my asset, nothing more. If you're fishing for scandal, you're barking up the wrong tree. Oh, I never fish for scandal, Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a breeze. I merely observe. For instance, I've heard Lydia was tired, perhaps thinking of a break after the championships. That might have concerned you, as her sponsor. Tate's fingers stilled on his cufflinks, and for a moment, his composure wavered. Tired. She was under pressure, sure, but champions thrive on that. She knew her career depended on the nationals. I reminded her of that. Naturally. My investment wasn't small. Miss Marple made a small note in her mind, her expression unchanged. Naturally, she echoed. And after her death, what becomes of your brand? Clara, perhaps, could step into her place. Tate snorted, leaning forward. Clara. She's got potential, but she lacks Lydia's fire. I'll find another star always do. Though I'll admit, the insurance on Lydia's career will soften the blow. Standard practice in this game. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her smile remained serene. Insurance, she said softly. How prudent. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a farmer who insured his prize cow, only to be rather too quick to claim the policy when she took ill. It raised questions, you see. Tate's jaw tightened, and he rose, signaling the end of the conversation. I've nothing to hide, Miss Marple. Lydia's death was a tragedy, likely a cramp or exhaustion. The police have my itinerary. I was in London that night, at a gala. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend. Miss Marple stood, her shawl slipping slightly as she offered a polite nod. Of course, Mr. Tate, you've been most kind. One last thing, did Lydia ever mention any troubles? With Clara, perhaps, or Dr. Wells? Tate paused at the door, his hand on the knob. She mentioned Clara's attitude after the championships, thought she was too hung up on that loss. As for Wells, she said he was clingy, even after their breakup. That's all I know. He left with a curt nod, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Miss Marple remained in the study, her gaze lingering on the photograph of Lydia. The smudge on the glass was faint, but deliberate, as if someone had touched it often. She stepped closer, noting the way the light caught Lydia's eyes, frozen in a moment of triumph. You were his empire, she murmured, but empires fall when the foundation shifts. She left the study and found Inspector Craddock waiting in the hall, his notebook open. Well, he asked, his voice low. What's your take on Tate? Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes thoughtful. He is a man of calculation, Inspector, and Lydia was his prize. His talk of insurance and his quick dismissal of Clara are telling. A man so invested in success might not take kindly to a star who wished to dim her light. Craddock frowned, flipping through his notes. He's got an alibi since if people saw him at that gala in London. But this insurance business, it's a hefty sum, enough to cover his losses and then some. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Money is a powerful motive, but so is control. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a businessman, Mr. Carter, who seemed generous, until his partner tried to leave. His kindness turned to threats overnight. Mr. Tate's empire rested on Lydia, and her fatigue might have been a threat he could not abide. Craddock nodded, jotting a note. I'll dig into his financials. Anything else from him? He spoke of Clara's resentment and Dr. Wells's lingering affection. Miss Marple said, both bear watching. But I am curious about this insurance policy. It suggests a man who plans for every outcome, even the unthinkable. As they walked toward the garden, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the pool, its serene surface a stark contrast to the turmoil it concealed. Tate's pragmatism was a mask, she suspected, hiding a deeper stake in Lydia's fate. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen such masks before. Mr. Grayson, the butcher, whose jovial smile hid a ruthless streak when his profits were at stake. Tate's wealth, his ambition, his cold detachment all pointed to a man who saw people as means to an end. But had that end included Lydia's death? She paused by the pool, her eyes scanning the tiles once more. No marks, no clues, yet the absence of evidence was itself a clue. If you were held under, she whispered to the water, it was by someone who knew how to leave no trace. Someone with a stake in your silence. Turning to Craddock, she said, we must look closer at Mr. Tate's dealings, Inspector. And at those who surrounded Lydia. Clara's envy, Dr. Wells's grief. Mr. Grayson's disciplinage is a thread, but Mr. Tate's ambition may be the needle that binds them. Craddock nodded, his expression grim. I'll get on it. But Miss Marple, you're making this sound like a conspiracy. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. Not a conspiracy, Inspector, but a collision of human weaknesses. In St. Mary Mead, I've learned that murder is rarely planned by many, but it is often born of one heart's desperation. We shall find that heart, in time. Chapter Lil. The ex-fiancés regret. The tea room in St. Mary Mead was a quaint haven, its lace-curtained windows letting in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, her knitting bag tucked beside her, a pot of Earl Grey steaming gently before her. The room hummed with the quiet chatter of villagers. But Miss Marple's attention was fixed on the door, where Dr. Simon Wells was due to arrive. She had chosen this neutral ground for their meeting, away from the oppressive grandeur of the Ashford estate, knowing that a familiar setting often loosened tongues. Her fingers rested lightly on her teacup, but her mind was as sharp as ever, weaving through the threads of Lydia Brent's death with the precision of her knitting needles. Dr. Wells entered, his medical bag swinging at his side, his face pale and drawn. He was a man of 30, with dark hair and eyes that held a quiet intensity, as if carrying a burden too heavy for words. His suit was well cut but slightly rumpled, a sign, Miss Marple noted, of distraction or sleeplessness. He spotted her and approached, offering a hesitant smile. Miss Marple, he said, his voice low. Thank you for seeing me here. The estate feels oppressive after everything. Miss Marple gestured to the chair opposite, her smile warm but her eyes keen. Not at all, Dr. Wells. A cup of tea can work wonders, don't you think? And this tea room is quite the place for a quiet chat. Do sit down. Wells settled into the chair, his hands fidgeting briefly before resting on the table. I'm not sure what more I can tell you, he said, his tone weary. I've spoken to Inspector Craddock. Lydia's death, it's a shock. I still can't believe she's gone. Miss Marple poured him a cup of tea, her movements deliberate, her gaze never leaving his face. "A terrible loss," she said softly. "She was a remarkable young woman, by all accounts." "You were engaged to her, I understand. That must make this all the harder." Wells's fingers tightened around the teacup, and he looked down, his eyes shadowed. "We were engaged, yes, until last year. It didn't work out. Lydia was consumed by her career. Swimming was her life, and I couldn't keep up. We parted amicably, or so I thought." Miss Marple tilted her head, her spectacles glinting. "Amicably," she repeated, her voice gentle but probing. "Yet breakups, even the kindest, can leave wounds. In St. Mary Mead, I recall young Elsie, who smiled bravely when her beau left her, but her heart was quite broken. Did you find it hard, Dr. Wells, to let Lydia go?" Wells's jaw tightened, and he took a sip of tea, as if buying time. "I loved her," he said finally, his voice low. "But she chose the pool over everything, over me, over herself. I wanted her to slow down, to live a little outside the water. She wouldn't listen. I suppose I was disappointed, but I didn't hold it against her." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was alert, noting the faint tremor in his voice, the way his gaze avoided hers. "Disappointment can linger," she said. "You're a doctor, trained to notice signs of strain. Did Lydia seem herself in the days before her death? Tired, perhaps, or troubled?" Wells hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I saw her that afternoon, at the estate. I stopped by to check on her. She'd mentioned feeling off. Nothing specific, just fatigue. I told her to rest, but she laughed it off. Said the Nationals were too close for breaks." He paused, his eyes distant. She seemed distracted though, not her usual self. Miss Marple made a mental note, her expression unchanged. "Distracted," she murmured. "That's interesting. And you were at the pool that evening, I believe." "Before the tragedy." Wells's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "I was there earlier, around 7. I checked her vitals, made sure she was fit to train. I left before their session started. Clara was there, too, getting ready." His voice grew defensive, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush in his cheeks. "Of course," she said, her tone soothing. "You were concerned for her, as a doctor and a friend. Did you notice anything unusual? Between Lydia and Clara, perhaps?" Wells's gaze flickered, and he leaned back, his hands dropping to his lap. They were tense, he admitted. Clara was always on edge around Lydia, especially after the championships. She thought Lydia cheated her out of gold. I overheard them arguing once, a week before. Clara was bitter, said Lydia didn't deserve the spotlight. Lydia just shrugged it off, but it stuck with me. Miss Marple's fingers twitched, as if longing for her knitting. "An argument," she said softly. "How illuminating. In my village, I've seen small quarrels grow into great troubles. A young man, Tom Willis, once argued with his friend over a borrowed plow. It seemed trivial, until the plow was found broken, and Tom's anger turned to worse." Wells's eyes widened, but he said nothing, his silence heavy. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over his words. "You left before 9, then?" she asked, her voice light, and saw nothing amiss. "I left at 8, he said quickly. "I had rounds at the hospital. The police have my schedule." His tone was firm, but his eyes darted to the window, as if seeking escape. Miss Marple nodded, her smile serene. "Thank you, Dr. Wells. You've been most helpful. I shan't keep you from your duties." As he rose, she added, almost casually, "One last thing, did Lydia ever speak of retiring? A champion might tire of the race, after all." Wells froze, his hand on his medical bag. "Retiring," he said, his voice low. "She mentioned it once, in passing. Said she might want a quieter life after the Nationals. I thought she was joking, she lived for swimming, but maybe. He trailed off, his expression unreadable, then left with a curt nod. Miss Marple sat alone, her tea cooling as she considered Wells's words. His grief seemed genuine, but his hesitation, his quick defense of his whereabouts, suggested more than sorrow. In St. Mary Mead, she had known men like Wells, quiet, reserved, their passions hidden until provoked. Young Robert, who courted a girl only to lose her to another, had seemed calm until his rage spilled over in a broken window and a stolen locket. She rose and stepped to the window, gazing out at the village green, where children played and life continued in its predictable rhythm. Wells's admission of Lydia's distraction, his mention of Clara's bitterness, added new strands to her tapestry. The groundskeeper's sighting of a figure at 10 o'clock lingered in her mind. Wells claimed to have left by 8, but alibis, she knew, could be as fragile as lace. Inspector Craddock found her as she left the tea room, his hat in hand, his face flushed from the heat. "Any progress with Wells?" he asked, falling into step beside her. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes thoughtful. "He is a man carrying a heavy heart, Inspector, but whether it's grief or guilt, I cannot yet say. He saw Lydia that evening, noted her distraction, and spoke of tension with Clara. Yet his own movements trouble me. He says he left at 8, but hearts do not always leave when bodies do." Craddock frowned, pulling out his notebook. "His hospital rounds check out, but there's a gap between 8 and 9:30. He could have lingered near the estate. And that business about Lydia being distracted, what do you make of it?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. "A distracted champion is a vulnerable one. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a girl, Mary, who was so lost in her thoughts she didn't see the trap set by a jealous friend. Lydia's distraction may have been her undoing, and Dr. Wells's knowledge of her state, medical and emotional, makes him a figure to watch." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "I'll check his movements again. What's next? Clara again, or Tate?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her voice was grave. "All in good time, Inspector. Each has a part in this puzzle, but Dr. Wells's regret feels like a key. Love, you see, can be as dangerous as envy, and twice as silent. We must tread carefully, lest we miss the truth hiding in his silence." As they parted, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the pool, its still waters a mirror to the secrets it held. Wells's love for Lydia, his medical expertise, his presence at the estate, pointed to a man who knew more than he said. And in that knowledge, she sensed, lay the next ripple in the mystery of Lydia Brent's death. Chapter 7. The Poolside Puzzle. The Ashford estate's walled garden was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. The pool at its center, a tranquil expanse that belied the tragedy it had witnessed. Miss Jane Marple stood at its edge, her shawl drawn close against the cooling air, her eyes tracing the smooth tiles as if they might whisper their secrets. The heat of the day had softened, but the weight of Lydia Brent's death hung heavy, a puzzle with pieces that refused to align. Inspector Craddock joined her, his notebook tucked under his arm, his face etched with the frustration of a man chasing shadows. "I've got the coroner's report," Craddock said, his voice low as he handed her a slim folder. "No drugs, no alcohol, but there's something odd, faint bruising on Lydia's shoulders, like someone gripped her hard. The coroner says it's consistent with being held underwater." Miss Marple's fingers paused on the folder, her eyes sharpening behind her spectacles. "Held underwater," she murmured, opening the report and scanning its clinical prose. "By someone strong, then, and determined. A champion swimmer would not yield easily, Inspector. These bruisers, they suggest a struggle, but a silent one." Craddock nodded, pointing to a diagram of the bruising. "The marks are symmetrical, here and here. Whoever did it had to be close, face to face, and Lydia didn't fight back hard enough to leave marks on the tiles. It's as if she was caught off guard." Miss Marple closed the folder, her gaze returning to the pool. Its surface was still, reflecting the fading sky. But her mind pictured Lydia's final moments, flailing, perhaps, or too stunned to resist. "The deep end," she said softly, stepping toward the pool's far side, where the water darkened to a sapphire hue. "She was found here, you said. Unusual for a training session, don't you think? A swimmer of her skill would favor the shallow end for laps, unless she had reason to be here." Craddock frowned, following her gaze. "The training logs show she was doing sprints that night. With Clara. Sprints are usually in the shallow end. But Clara said Lydia wanted to practice dives, so they moved to the deep end before she left." Miss Marple's lips pursed, a subtle sign of her skepticism. "Dives," she repeated, her tone thoughtful. "Yet the logs mention only sprints. Clara's story shifts, doesn't it? In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a young woman, Clarinot, our Clara, mind, who claimed she was picking apples when a barn caught fire. Her story changed with each telling, until the truth of her matchbox emerged." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You think Clara's lying about the dives?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm, "that Clara's account merits scrutiny. The groundskeeper saw a figure at 10, yet Clara claims she left at 9. And these bruises only someone Lydia trusted could have approached so closely without raising alarm." She knelt by the pool's edge, her fingers brushing the tiles, smooth and unmarred. "No scratches, no signs of a struggle," she murmured. "If Lydia was held under, it was swift, precise. Someone knew her strength and used it against her, perhaps luring her to the deep end where escape was harder." Craddock rubbed his chin, his frustration evident. "That could be any of them, Grayson's. Strong enough. Wells has medical knowledge. Even Tate could have hired someone. But Clara was there that night, and her story's shaky." Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping slightly as she turned to him. "Indeed, Inspector. Let us look at the training logs again. Small details, you know, can be like dropped stitches. They unravel the whole pattern." They returned to the library, where the training logs lay spread across a table, their pages filled with Grayson's meticulous notes. Miss Marple traced the entries for the night of Lydia's death. Sprints from 7 to 9. Clara and Lydia together, no mention of dives. "Clara's claim of diving practice is absent here," she said, her finger pausing on the page. "Yet she insists it happened. Why invent such a detail?" Craddock leaned over, his brow furrowed. "To explain why Lydia was in the deep end, maybe. If she was covering her tracks, she'd need a reason for Lydia staying late." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her expression remained serene. "Precisely. And the groundskeeper citing a figure in a dark coat at 10. Clara says she was gone, but suppose she lingered, driven by some impulse she could not quell. In St. Mary Mead, I recall a boy, young Jimmy, who swore he was home when a shop window was smashed. His muddy boots told a different tale." Craddock jotted a note, his pencil moving swiftly. "I'll press the groundskeeper again, see if he can describe that figure better. But what about the others? Wells was at the pool earlier, and Tate's insurance policy keeps nagging at me." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the other suspects. Dr. Wells's presence that evening, his knowledge of Lydia's state, makes him a figure of interest. And Mr. Tate's financial stake, his cold pragmatisms, suggests a man who plans for all outcomes. Yet Clara's proximity to the event, her shifting story, places her closest to the pool that night. She closed the logbook, her fingers lingering on its cover. "We must also consider the pool itself, Inspector. Its depth, its isolation. The gate was locked, you said, accessible only to those with keys. Grayson, Lydia, the groundskeeper. Clara had no key, but she was with Lydia. Could she have taken Lydia's key, perhaps, or stayed behind unnoticed?" Craddock's eyes widened. "You think she planned it? Lured Lydia to the deep end and held her under?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost sad. I think, Inspector, that envy can make monsters of us all. In my village, a woman named Agnes once tampered with a rival's sewing machine, all for a prize ribbon. Clara's silver medals, always second to Lydia's gold, may have been a heavier burden than we know. They stepped back into the garden, the pool now shadowed as the sun dipped lower. Miss Marple paused, her gaze fixed on the deep end. If Lydia was held under, she said softly, it was by someone who knew her habits, her trust. Someone who could stand close, grip her shoulders, and push her down without fear of resistance. Clara's strength as a swimmer would suffice. But so would Grayson's discipline, or Wells's precision. Craddock sighed, tucking his notebook away. We're drowning in possibilities. Miss Marple, how do we narrow it down? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. By listening, Inspector, people reveal themselves in what they say and what they hide. Clara's lie about the dives, Wells's hesitation, Tate's detachment, Grayson's insistence on an accident teaches a clue. We shall gather them all, like pebbles on a shore, until the tide of truth comes in. As Craddock nodded, promising to recheck alibis and press the groundskeeper, Miss Marple lingered by the pool, her thoughts swirling like the water's faint ripples. The bruises on Lydia's shoulders, the deep end's silent witness, Clara's inconsistent tale-all pointed to a crime of betrayal. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen trust shattered before Mrs. Price's sabotaged roses, ruined by a friend who smiled while wielding the shears. Here, in the still waters of the Ashford estate, another friend had wielded a deadlier weapon, and Miss Marple was determined to find out who. Chapter 8. The Medals wait. Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead was a haven of quiet charm, its chintz curtains fluttering in the soft evening breeze, the scent of roses wafting through the open window. She had invited Clara Voss for tea, hoping the cozy familiarity of her home would coax truths that the Ashford estate's grandeur had stifled. The table was set with her best china, a silver teapot steaming gently, and a plate of scones fresh from the oven. Miss Marple sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting bag at her feet, her eyes bright with anticipation as she awaited Clara's arrival. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, a steady reminder of the time that had run out for Lydia Brent. Clara arrived promptly, her blonde hair loosed for once, framing a face pale with strain. She wore a simple dress, but her movements were stiff, as if braced for an ordeal. Miss Marple greeted her with a warm smile, ushering her to a chair by the hearth. "Miss Voss, how kind of you to come," she said, her voice as soothing as the tea she poured. "I find a cup of Earl Grey so comforting, don't you? And these scones are Mrs. Baker's recipe, quite the talk of the village." Clara managed a faint smile, accepting the cup with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low. "I'm not sure why you wanted to see me again. I've told you everything I know about Lydia." Miss Marple settled into her chair, her spectacles glinting in the firelight. "Oh, I'm sure you have, my dear, but sometimes we recall things in quieter moments. In St. Mary Mead, I've found that a little chat over tea can bring clarity. You and Lydia were such close teammates, after all. It must be a heavy loss." Clara's eyes flickered, and she sipped her tea, her gaze fixed on the cup. "It is," she said softly. She was everything I wanted to be. Strong, fearless, everyone loved her." Her voice held a note of reverence, but beneath it, Miss Marple detected a sharper edge, like a blade hidden in silk. "Admirable qualities," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, "and yet, even the brightest stars can cast shadows. Tell me about the championships, Miss Voss. That gold medal Lydia wanted was quite a moment, wasn't it?" Clara's fingers tightened on the cup, her knuckles whitening. "It was just another race," she said, her voice tight. "She won gold, I took silver. That's how it always went. She set the cup down with a clink that echoed in the quiet room. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of kindly curiosity. Silver is no small feat, she said. Yet I imagine it stung, standing so close to gold. I recall a village fete, where young Mary's cake took second to her friends. She smiled, but her eyes told another story. You felt Lydia's victory was unfair, didn't you? Clara's face flushed, and she leaned forward, her eyes blazing. Unfair, she cheated. In the final lap, she cut me off at the turn deliberately. I could have won, but the judges didn't care. They never did when it was Lydia. Her voice cracked, and she sank back, her hands twisting in her lap. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was alert, noting the raw passion in Clara's outburst. A grievous moment, she said. To feel cheated of your do-that's a heavy burden. Did you ever speak to Lydia about it? Clara's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice barely audible. I tried, once. She laughed it off, said it was just racing. She didn't even apologize. Her words were laced with bitterness, and Miss Marple saw the weight of that unacknowledged slight, like a stone sinking in still water in St. Mary. Mead, Miss Marple said softly. I knew a woman, Mrs. Elwood, who felt slighted by her neighbor's prize roses. She bore it silently, until one night she cut them down. Small hurts, you see, can grow into great acts. She paused, pouring more tea, her movements deliberate. You were at the pool that night, Clara. You said you left at 9, but the groundskeeper saw someone at 10. Could that have been you? Perhaps lingering over some unresolved hurt? Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. No. I left at 9, like I said. I went to my room. I don't know who the groundskeeper. Sid could have been anyone. Grayson maybe, or that Dr. Wells. He was always hanging around Lydia. Her voice rose, defensive, and Miss Marple noted the way her hands clenched. The thread of her dress now frayed. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. I only wonder, my dear, because that metal weighed so heavily on you. Lydia's gold, your silverite must have felt like a theft, in a way. Enough to make one act rashly, perhaps. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I didn't do anything, she cried. I was jealous, yes, but I didn't hurt her. Lydia was my friend, even if she didn't see me. You're twisting things, making it sound like she stopped, her breath ragged, tears brimming in her eyes. I need to go. Miss Marple rose, her expression serene, but her eyes sharp. I'm sorry to upset you, Miss Voss. Stay, finish your tea. I only seek the truth, for Lydia's sake. But Clara shook her head, grabbing her coat and fleeing the cottage, the door slamming behind her. Miss Marple sat back down, her tea untouched, her mind racing. Clara's outburst had been revealing her envy, her sense of injustice, her quick deflection to Grayson and Wells. The groundskeeper's sighting at 10 o'clock gnawed at her. A loose thread in Clara's tightly woven story. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen such denials before young Tommy, caught stealing apples, had wept and pointed fingers until his own guilt unraveled. She reached for her notebook, jotting, Clara raw envy, claims innocence, but defensive, lead. About leaving at 9. She closed the book and gazed into the fire, its flames dancing like the ripples of the pool. Clara's jealousy was a vivid thread, but Miss Marple knew better than to pull it alone. Grayson's stern control, Tate's cold ambition, Wells's lingering lovage wove through the mystery, and Clara's outburst had only tightened the knot as the clock struck 7. A knock at the door announced Inspector Craddock, his face weary but alert. He stepped inside, accepting a cup of tea with a grateful nod. Well, Miss Marple, he said, settling by the fire, how did it go with Clara? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. "She is a young woman, consumed by envy, Inspector, and it burns brightly, her tale of the championships. Her belief that Lydia cheated is a wound still fresh. She denies lingering at the pool, but her agitation suggests otherwise. We must look closer at that groundskeeper's sighting." Craddock nodded, pulling out his notebook. I spoke to him again. "He's certain it was a woman slender, in a dark coat, near the pool gate at 10. Could be Clara, but he didn't see her face. Grayson's out east, Broad, and Wells. Was at the hospital by then, though his earlier visit still bothers me." Miss Marple's fingers traced the arm of her chair, her thoughts drifting to the pool's deep end, the bruises on Lydia's shoulders. "A woman," she murmured. "That narrows our gaze, but not our minds. Clara's strength as a swimmer could have held Lydia under, but so could a moment of desperation. We must also consider Mr. Tate's insurance, Dr. Wells's knowledge of Lydia's state. Each has a motive, but Clara's heart is the most exposed." Craddock sighed, rubbing his temple. "It's a tangle, Miss Marple. The coroner's report. The bruises, it's murder, no doubt, but Clara's the only one who was there, or was she?" Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. "In St. Mary Mead, Inspector, I once saw a girl accused of theft because she was seen near the vicar's silver. It was her sister, you see, who took it, out of spite. Clara's presence is damning, but presence is not proof. We need the why, the how's a moment when envy turned to action." Craddock jotted a note, his pencil scratching softly. "I'll check Clara's movements again, see if anyone saw her after 9. What's next?" "Tate's financials are coming in, and I'm digging into Wells's hospital logs." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, her voice steady. "All in good time, Inspector. Clara's medal weighs heavily, but so do Tate's profits and Wells's regrets. The pool holds the truth, and we shall find it, one ripple at a time." As Craddock left, Miss Marple gazed into the fire, her thoughts swirling like the flames. Clara's jealousy was a fire of its own, but whether it had consumed Lydia remained to be seen. In the quiet of her cottage, she sensed the truth drawing closer, like a shadow cast by a champion's gold. Chapter 9. The sponsors secret the morning air at the Ashford estate carried a crisp edge, a fleeting respite from the oppressive heat that had gripped St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple stood in the estate's garden, her shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders, gazing at the pool that seemed to mock her with its serene surface. The events of the previous evening, Clara Voss's tearful outburst in her cottage, lingered in her mind, a vivid thread in the tapestry of Lydia Brandt's death. But today, her focus turned to Reginald Tate, the sponsor whose polished exterior hid motives as murky as the pool's depths. She had requested another meeting, sensing that his financial stake in Lydia's career held secrets yet to be uncovered. Inspector Craddock met her in the estate's hall, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to yield clear answers. "I've got something new," he said, his voice low, as he handed her a thin file. Tate's financials came through. He took out a substantial insurance policy on Lydia's career last year, covers injury, retirement, or death. If she died, he'd collect enough to offset his losses and fund a new campaign. Makes you wonder. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened behind her spectacles, though her expression remained serene. "Wonder, indeed, Inspector," she said, tucking the file under her arm. "A man who insures a life so thoroughly plans for all eventualities. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a merchant, Mr. Carter, who insured his shop against fire, only to be found with matches when it burned. Let us see what Mr. Tate reveals today." They entered the study, where Tate awaited, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's light. The room was as imposing as before, its walls adorned with Lydia's triumphs. But Miss Marple noted a new tension in Tate's posture, a slight rigidity in his tailored suit. He rose, offering a smile that was more courtesy than warmth. "Miss Marple, Inspector," he said, gesturing to the leather chairs. "I hope this won't take long. My schedule is rather tight." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded over the file, her smile as mild as ever. "We shan't keep you, Mr. Tate," she said. "I only wish to clarify a few matters. Your support for Lydia Brent was remarkable. She was the cornerstone of your brand, was she not?" Tate nodded, leaning back behind his desk, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood. "She was. Lydia's face sold my products better than any advertisement. Her gold medals were gold for me, too. Her death is a setback, but I'll recover. Business always does." Miss Marple tilted her head, her spectacles catching the light. "How pragmatic," she said softly. "Yet I understand Lydia was considering a break, perhaps even retirement. That must have concerned you, with so much invested in her." Tate's fingers stilled, and his smile tightened. Retirement. She was 24, at her peak. I told her to push through. The Nationals' rest could come later. She understood her obligations. His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple noted the faint crease in his brow, a crack in his polished facade. "Obligations," she repeated, her tone gentle but probing. "In my village, St. Mary Mead, I knew a man who sponsored our local band. He was generous, until the conductor wished to step down. His generosity turned to pressure then." "Did you ever pressure Lydia, Mr. Tate?" Tate's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Pressure, I encouraged her, as any sponsor would. She was tired, yes, but champions don't quit. I reminded her of her contract standard business practice. You're fishing for something that isn't there, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's smile remained serene, though her mind was alert, noting his defensiveness, the way his gaze flicked to the locked drawer of his desk. "Oh, I never fish," she said. "I merely observe. For instance, this insurance policy on Lydia's career, it's quite substantial, isn't it? A prudent man might take such a step, but it does raise questions." Tate's face hardened, and he stood, his chair scraping slightly. "That policy was routine," he snapped. "Any sponsor insures their assets. Lydia was a risk, like any athlete. If she retired or got injured, I'd lose millions. The policy ensured I could pivot to a new star, like Clara Voss, if need be." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though she kept her tone mild. "Clara Voss," she said. "You mentioned her before, as a lesser light. Yet with Lydia gone, she might step into the spotlight. Did you ever discuss this with her?" Tate hesitated, his hand resting on the desk. "Clara knew her place," he said. "I told her she'd get her chance if she kept training, but she's no Lydian, ever will be. I didn't need to discuss anything beyond that." Miss Marple made a mental note, her fingers twitching as if reaching for her knitting. "Of course," she said. "And that night, Mr. Tattoo were in London, at a gala, I believe, quite a distance from the pool." Tate nodded, his composure returning. "I was. Dozens of witnesses asked the police. I got back to the estate after midnight. Whatever happened to Lydia, I was nowhere near it." Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping slightly, as she offered a polite nod. "Thank you, Mr. Tate. You've been most forthcoming. One last thing, did Lydia ever mention troubles with Dr. Wells or Mr. Grayson? A sponsor hears many confidences, I imagine." Tate's eyes flickered, and he paused before answering. "She said Wells was too attached, always checking on her, even after their breakup. Grayson was tough, but she respected him. That's all I know." He opened the door, signaling the end of the conversation. Miss Marple left the study, Craddock at her side, the file still under her arm. As they stepped into the hall, she glanced back at the photograph of Lydia on Tate's desk, its smudge more pronounced in the morning light. "A man who insures a life so thoroughly," she murmured, sees it as a commodity, and commodities, Inspector, can be discarded when they falter. Craddock frowned, flipping open his notebook. You think Tate had a hand in it? His alibi's solid. London's 2 hours away. But that insurance policy, it's a motive, no question. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts drifting to the pool's silent depths. A motive, yes, but opportunity is another matter. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a man who profited from a fire he didn't set himself. He had others do his bidding. You see, Mr. Tate's wealth could buy many things, perhaps even silence. Craddock's eyes widened. You're suggesting he hired someone? Clara, maybe, or even Wells. Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. I suggest nothing, Inspector, but I wonder. Tate's ambition is cold, calculated. He spoke of Clara as a potential replacement, yet dismissed her worth. And his mention of Wells's attachment, there's a pattern there, a nudge toward others' guilt. They paused by the garden, the pool glinting in the distance. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on its surface, her mind turning over Tate's words, his guarded demeanor. The bruises on Lydia's shoulders, she said softly, required strength and proximity. Tate was absent, but his influence was not. Could he have planted a seed, perhaps, in a mind already primed with envy? Craddock jotted a note, his pencil moving swiftly. I'll dig deeper into his financials, see if there's any trail payments, messages. But Clara's still our strongest link. She was at the pool, and her story's unraveling. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. Clara's envy is a fire, but Tate's ambition is the fuel. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a farmer profit from a rival's ruin, though his hands stayed clean. We must look at all the threads. Resentment, Wells's regret, Grayson's control. But Tate's secret, this policy, adds a new shade to our tapestry. As Craddock left to pursue his inquiries, Miss Marple lingered by the pool, her thoughts swirling like the water's faint ripples. Tate's insurance was a calculated move, a safety net for a man who saw Lydia as an asset. But had that calculation extended to murder? In the quiet of the garden, she sensed the truth drawing closer. A shadow cast by a sponsor's greed, waiting to be brought into the light. Chapter 10. The doctor's confession. The evening air, in St. Mary Mead, carried a gentle chill. A whisper of autumn despite the lingering summer heat. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, the glow of the fire casting soft shadows across the room. Her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale blue shawl. The events of the day, Reginald Tate's guarded revelations, and the troubling insurance policy had tightened the threads of the mystery surrounding Lydia Brent's death. Yet it was Dr. Simon Wells's unexpected knock at her door that now drew her attention. His silhouette framed against the dusk, as she welcomed him inside. Dr. Wells stood hesitantly in the doorway, his medical bag clutched tightly, his dark eyes shadowed with a weariness that spoke of more than physical fatigue. Miss Marple, he said, his voice low and strained, I need to speak with you. I haven't been entirely truthful. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she gestured to the armchair by the hearth, her smile as warm as the firelight. Do come in, Dr. Wells, she said gently. A cup of tea will do us both good, I think. There's nothing like a quiet moment to set things right. Wells sank into the chair, his shoulders slumping as if unburdened by the mere act of sitting. Miss Marple poured tea from her silver pot, her movements deliberate, her eyes never leaving his face. She noted the faint tremor in his hands, the way his gaze darted to the window, as if expecting pursuit. Now, she said, handing him a cup, what is it you wish to tell me? Truth, you know, has a way of easing the heart. Wells took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the cup. I lied, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. About that night at the pool. I told you I left at 8, but I was there later, closer to 9. I saw Lydia arguing with Clara. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her mind was alert, weaving this new thread into the tapestry of the case. An argument, she said softly, her tone inviting rather than accusing. That's most interesting, Dr. Wells. In St. Mary Mead, I've found that arguments often reveal more than calm words. What was it about? Wells's eyes dropped to his tea, his voice heavy with regret. It was about the championships. Clara was furious, said Lydia had cheated her out of gold, that she'd never get her chance while Lydia was around. Lydia tried to calm her, said it was just competition. But Clara wouldn't listen. She was venomous. I've never seen her like that. Miss Marple tilted her head, her spectacles glinting in the firelight. Venomous, she repeated. A strong word. And you, Dr. Wells, what did you do? Wells's jaw tightened, and he set the cup down with a clink. I tried to intervene, told Clara to back off. She stormed out, and I stayed a moment to check on Lydia. She was shaken, but said she could handle it. I left her there, in the pool, swimming laps. I swear, that's all. His voice cracked, and he looked up, his eyes pleading. I didn't hurt her, Miss Marple. I loved her. Miss Marple's fingers twitched, as if reaching for her knitting, though she kept them still. Love, she said softly, is a powerful force, Dr. Wells, in my village. I knew a young man, Robert, who loved a girl so fiercely he broke a window when she turned to another. Your love for Lydia, did it linger, even after your partying? Wells's face paled, and he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. I never stopped loving her, he admitted, his voice raw. When we broke it off, I told myself it was for the best. She was married to her career, and I couldn't compete. But seeing her that night, so tired, so vulnerable, it brought it all back. I wanted to protect her, not harm her. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy, though her mind was racing, noting the intensity in his words, the way his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Protect her, she said. Yet you left her alone in the pool, after such a heated exchange. Did you see Clara leave, or anyone else near the gate? Wells shook his head, his gaze distant. Clara left first, slamming the gate behind her. I didn't see anyone else. The groundskeeper's cottage was dark, and Grayson's quarters were on the other side of the estate. I thought Lydia was safe. She was always so strong. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts swirling like the steam rising from the cup. Wells's confession shifted the puzzle's pieces. His presence at 9 brought him closer to the time of the groundskeeper's sighting, and his account of Clara's anger tightened the noose around her. Yet his own emotions, raw and unguarded, suggested a man capable of desperate acts. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen love turn to Raj young Elsie's letters to a married man had led to a scandal that shook the village. You're a doctor, she said, her voice gentle but probing. Those bruises on Lydia's shoulders, noted in the coroner's report, could they have been made by someone with medical knowledge, someone who knew how to apply force precisely? Wells's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. You think I did it? He said, his voice rising. I could never. Lydia was everything to me. Those bruises. Anyone strong could have made them. Clara's a swimmer. She's got the strength. Or Grayson, he's built like a bull. Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost sad. I think nothing, Dr. Wells, but I must ask. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a doctor who swore he meant no harm. Yet his knowledge was used to ill effect. Your skills, your presence at the pool, they place you in a delicate position. Wells stood, his hands shaking as he grabbed his bag. I came to you to tell the truth, not to be accused. I loved Lydia, and I failed her by leaving that night. That's my guilt, but it's not murder. He moved to the door, then paused, his voice low. Ask Clara about that night. She was angrier than I've ever seen her. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping slightly as she offered a nod. "Thank you, Dr. Wells. Your honesty is a step toward the truth. We shall find it, for Lydia's sake." As Wells left, the door closing softly behind him, Miss Marple returned to her armchair. Her knitting resumed as her mind worked through his words. His confession was a revelation, placing him at the pool, closer to the critical hour. But his grief seemed genuine, his love a palpable weight. Yet love, she knew, could twist into something darker, as it had with young Robert in the village, whose devotion had led to destruction. Inspector Craddock arrived shortly after. His face flushed from a day of chasing leads. He settled by the fire, accepting a cup of tea with a weary sigh. "I heard Wells was here," he said, pulling out his notebook. "Anything new?" Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her voice calm. "He was at the pool until 9, Inspector, and witnessed an argument between Lydia and Clara. Clara's anger over the championships was fierce, he says, and she left in a rage. His own presence, however, raises questions. His love for Lydia was not as dormant as he claimed." Craddock's eyes widened, his pencil pausing. 9 o'clock, that's close to the groundskeeper's sighting. If he stayed longer, he could have been the figure in the dark coat. And those Brucehaus's medical training would let him know exactly how to hold her without leaving too much evidence. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Indeed, but we must not leap to conclusions. Clara's anger, Wells's regret, Tate's insurance, Grayson's controlage is a thread, and the pool ties them together. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a man accused of theft because he was seen near the crime, but it was his rival who held the stolen goods. We must look at Clara again, but Wells's heart is a knot we cannot ignore." Craddock jotted a note, his expression grim. "I'll check his hospital logs again, see if there's any gap after 9. What's next?" Clara's story is crumbling, but Wells is looking shakier by the minute. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze fixed on the fire. "We gather the threads, Inspector, and see where they lead. The pool's silence speaks, and Dr. Wells's confession is a ripple we cannot dismiss. Love, like envy, can drown even the strongest swimmer." As Craddock left, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the fire's glow mirroring the clarity forming in her mind. Wells's confession had shifted the puzzle, but the truth remained just beneath the surface, waiting for the right tug to bring it to light. Chapter 11. The final lap. The drawing room of the Ashford estate was steeped in the hush of late afternoon, its tall windows casting long shadows across the polished floor. Miss Jane Marple stood near the fireplace, her slight figure framed by the flickering light, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the room itself sensed the culmination of a mystery that had rippled through St. Mary Mead like a stone dropped in the estate's fateful pool. Inspector Craddock had gathered the suspects: Harold Grayson, Clara Voss, Reginald Tate, and Dr. Simon Wells at Miss Marple's request, each seated in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a study in unease. The pool glimmered beyond the windows, a silent witness to the truth about to be unveiled. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, swept over the group, noting Grayson's rigid posture, Clara's clenched hands, Tate's forced calm, and Wells's averted gaze. She clasped her hands, her voice calm but commanding, carrying the gentle authority of one who had unraveled many a village secret. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. "Lydia, Brent's death was no accident, and I believe the truth lies here, among us. A champion swimmer, drowned in her own element, requires a betrayal most profound." Grayson shifted, his stopwatch glinting at his neck. "This is nonsense," he growled. "Lydia was exhausted. Cramps happen. You're wasting our time, Miss." Marple's smile was serene, undeterred. "Patience, Mr. Grayson. In St. Mary Mead, I've learned that haste obscures truth. The coroner's report tells us Lydia was held underwater, her shoulders bruised by a grip both strong and deliberate. This was no cramp, but a calculated act by someone she trusted. Clara's face paled, her fingers twisting in her lap. "You can't think I did it," she said, her voice trembling. "Lydia was my friend. I left the pool at 9. I told you that." Miss Marple turned to her, her eyes kind but piercing. "Indeed, Miss Voss, you did." Yet the groundskeeper saw a figure by the pool at 10, a slender woman in a dark coat. Your story of leaving at 9, of diving practice, is not in the training logs. Why, I wonder, did you feel the need to embellish? Clara's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her voice rising. "I didn't embellish. We were practicing dives, that's all. I left her there, swimming. I didn't see anyone else." Miss Marple's gaze held hers, steady and unyielding. "In my village, I knew a girl, Agnes, who swore she was elsewhere. When a theft occurred, her story shifted, just as yours has. The championships, Clara Lydia's gold, your silver. You believed she cheated you, didn't you? That wound festered, a weight heavier than any medal." Clara's breath hitched, and she sank back, tears brimming. "I was angry, yes, but I didn't hurt her. I couldn't." Tate cleared his throat, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. "This is all very dramatic, Miss Marple, but I was in London that night. My alibi is airtight. Whatever happened, it wasn't me." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "Your alibi is noted, Mr. Tate. Yet your insurance policy on Lydia's career a substantial sum suggests a man who plans for loss. You pressed her to continue, despite her fatigue. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a merchant profit from a partner's ruin, his hands clean but his intent clear. Did you, perhaps, encourage another to act?" Tate's face reddened, and he stood, his fists clenched. "That's absurd. I'm a businessman, not a murderer. I had no reason to want Lydia dead. She was my brand." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to Wells, who sat silently, his hands clasped tightly. "And you, Dr. Wells," she said softly. "You loved Lydia, even after your parting. You were at the pool until 9, witnessing Clara's anger. Your medical knowledge could explain those precise bruises, applied with just enough force to subdue without chaos." Wells's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "I told you, I loved her. I left her alive, swimming. I'd never harm her, never." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice steady, her gaze fixed on Clara. "Love, ambition, envy, these are the currents that carried Lydia to her end. But it is you, Miss Voss, who stands at the heart of this tragedy. You were at the pool that night, not at 9, but later. The groundskeeper saw you, and your lie about diving practice betrays you. Lydia's gold was your torment, her success a mirror to your own perceived failures." Clara's face crumpled, and she rose, her hands shaking. "No, I didn't mean to. It wasn't planned." Her voice was a sob, raw and desperate. "We argued again, after Simon left. She laughed at me, said I'd never be her. I pushed her under, just for a moment, to make her see. But she didn't come up. I didn't mean to kill her." She collapsed into her chair, her sobs echoing in the silent room. Grayson's face was ashen, Tate's mouth set in a grim line. And Wells stared at Clara, his eyes wide with shock. Craddock stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Clara Voss, you'll need to come with me." Miss Marple watched as Clara was led away, her heart heavy but her mind clear. "Envy," she said softly, almost to herself, "is a tide that pulls even the strongest under. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a woman ruin her friend's roses out of spite. Clara's act was darker, but born of the same root." As the room emptied, Craddock turned to her, his notebook closed. "You did it again, Miss Marple. How did you know it was Clara? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her voice was grave. The heart, Inspector, always speaks loudest. Clara's envy was a wound that bled in every word, every glance. The pool told its story, the deep end, the bruises, the lie about the dives. She trusted Lydia, and that trust was her undoing. Craddock nodded, his expression one of quiet awe. You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'd have chased Tate's money or Wells's love for weeks. Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost sad. In St. Mary Mead, I've learned that truth lies in the human heart, not in grand schemes. Clara's silver was her prison, and Lydia's gold the key she could not grasp. As Craddock left to handle the formalities, Miss Marple lingered by the window, gazing at the pool. Its surface was still. Once more, but its secrets had been laid bare, a champion's life extinguished by a rival's desperate grasp for glory. Chapter 12. The ripples and the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a soft twilight over the Ashford estate, where the pool lay still, its surface a mirror to the first stars of evening. Miss Jane Marple stood alone by its edge, her shawl drawn close against the cooling air, her eyes fixed on the water that had claimed Lydia Brent's life. The events of the afternoon, Clara Voss's tearful confession, the stunned silence of Grayson, Tate, and Wells had brought the mystery to its close. Yet the weight of it lingered, like ripples spreading from a stone long sunk. Inspector Craddock had taken Clara into custody, her sobs echoing down the manor's halls. But Miss Marple remained, seeking a moment of quiet to reflect on the human frailties that had led to such a tragedy. The garden was silent, save for the distant chirp of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Miss Marple's fingers traced the edge of her shawl, her mind sifting through the threads that had unraveled in the drawing-room. Clara's envy, raw and consuming, had been the tide that pulled Lydia under. But the others had played their parts, their ambitions and regrets stirring the currents. She turned from the pool, her steps slow but deliberate, and made her way back to the manor, where Craddock awaited her in the library, his face weary but relieved. "You've done it, Miss Marple," he said, rising from a chair by the fire, his notebook tucked away. "Clara's confession ties it all up: motive, opportunity, even the bruises. I'd have been chasing Tate's insurance or Wells's love for weeks without you." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her smile faint, but warm. "You give me too much credit, Inspector," she said, her voice gentle. The truth was always there, in the pool's silence, in Clara's eyes. "In St. Mary Mead, I've learned that envy is a poison that seeps slowly, but its effects are deadly. Clara's silver medals were her chains, and Lydia's gold the lock she could not break." Craddock nodded, leaning against the mantel. "She's admitted it all," said. "It was a moment of rage, not planned. She pushed Lydia under to make her see, as she put it, but didn't expect her to stay down. The bruises match her grip, and the groundskeeper's sighting seals it. But what about the others? Tate's insurance, Wells's lie, were they just distractions?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles, though her expression was grave. "Not distractions, Inspector, but shadows cast by the same light. Mr. Tate's policy was a cold calculation, a safety net for a man who saw Lydia as a means to wealth. Had she retired, he might have lost millions, and such men do not take losses lightly. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a grocer who smiled while squeezing his supplier's dry. Mr. Tate's smile was much the same." Craddock frowned, his fingers tapping the mantel. "You think he could have been involved? His alibis? Solid London, witnesses the lot." Miss Marple tilted her head, her fingers twitching as if longing for her knitting. "Involved, perhaps not. But his pressure on Lydia, his insistence," she continued despite her fatigues, "at the stage. A champion pushed too far becomes vulnerable, and Clara's envy found its moment. As for Dr. Wells, his love was a burden. He could not shed his lie about leaving at 8. His presence at Ninit spoke of a heart still tethered to Lydia. But his grief, I believe, is genuine. Craddock pulled out his notebook, flipping through its pages. Wells's hospital logs check out after 9:30, and Grayson was in his quarters, watching tapes. Tate's gala kept him away. It all comes back to Clara. She was there, she had the strength, and her motive was burning. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the window, where the pool's faint glow was just visible. Clara's motive was indeed a fire, but it was kindled by others' hands. Grayson's relentless training, Tate's unyielding ambition, Wells's lingering love, they all pressed on Lydia, and Clara's jealousy was the spark that ignited the tragedy. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a woman, Mrs. Price, lose her prize roses to a friend's spite. The act was small, but the root was the same envy, fed by others' expectations. Craddock closed his notebook, his expression one of quiet awe. You see it all, don't you? The way people's hearts twist, even when they don't mean it. Clara's broken cheese, not a killer by nature, just a girl who snapped. Miss Marple's smile was sad, her voice soft. The human heart is a fragile thing, Inspector. Clara wanted to shine, but Lydia's light was too bright. She acted in a moment of desperation, and now she must carry that weight. It is a heavy burden, heavier than any metal. As Craddock rose to leave, promising to finalize the reports, Miss Marple remained by the fire, her thoughts returning to the pool. Its stillness was a deception, a mirror hiding the violence beneath. She pictured Lydia, strong and vibrant, betrayed by a friend whose envy had drowned them both. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen such betrayals before, small, petty acts that echoed the larger sins of the world. Clara's confession had closed the case, but the ripples of her act would linger. In the hearts of those who had known Lydia, and in the quiet village that had borne witness, Miss Marple left the estate and walked slowly back to her cottage, the stars now bright above St. Mary Mead. The village was asleep, its cobbled streets silent, but her mind was awake, turning over the lessons of the case. Envy, ambition, love, they were currents that ran through every heart, and in their collision, lives were lost. She reached her cottage, the familiar glow of her lamp welcoming her home, and settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed as if no time had passed. The fire crackled softly, and Miss Marple's needles moved with their steady rhythm, each stitch a step toward peace. The pool is quiet now, she murmured to herself, but its ripples will not be forgotten. In the warmth of her cottage, with the mystery solved and Clara's guilt laid bare, Miss Marple felt the weight of human frailty settle around her, as familiar as her shawl, and as enduring as the truths she had uncovered.